Well, hello all, and welcome to a very exciting Civilizations in Review. I'm really excited to jump into this empire, the Marinid, not marmalade or not marinade, the Marinid Empire, a Moroccan one. We're here with Emma Schneck, who's calling in from Morocco, currently living and working there, and our co-moderator, Coretta Lemaitre, to dive into this Marinid Empire. So thanks all for tuning in. After tonight's call, and thanks for us for being on Facebook, this will also be in four other places: our website, our YouTube, our Instagram, and our Spotify. So feel free to check us out on any of those places. It's just at Alfuzaic everywhere. So again, thanks to Emma for writing this work, Coretta for helping me interview, and we're gonna dive on in. Coretta, go ahead and begin with those 101 word intro.
Sure. All right. 101 on the Marinids. And I don't know anything about the Marinids, so this is going to be a great session for me. So originating from Zenata Berber descent, the Marinid Dynasty controlled much of North Africa from the mid-13th to late 15th centuries. Operating out of the city of Fez in modern-day Morocco, the Marinids occupied most of what is now Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco up into southern Spain. The Marinid Dynasty is one defined by a prolific expansion of education, architecture, and relative religious tolerance, as well as military expansion and conquest. Under Marinid rule, Fez enjoyed a golden age in which madrasas and royal palaces were constructed, while Qarawiyyin University was expanded. Maliki Sunnism was instituted as its main religion.
So many angles to go from this. First and foremost, I'm guessing you chose this because you are currently in Morocco and were when you wrote this, but tell us more on what attracted you to the Marinids in the first place, Emma.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually chose this, yes, like you were saying, because I'm currently living in Morocco and I wanted something, around where I was based. But also on your suggestion as well is something like, hey, like there's this interesting empire which had a lot of different cultural impacts in Morocco, and maybe you'll be able to like learn a little bit more about the context in which you're living. And so obviously before I really knew nothing about the Marinid dynasty, but after researching, I found a few really awesome like key points, specifically kind of how the Marinids had developed Fez as a huge like cultural epicenter. So even today, most people consider Fez as kind of like the cultural epicenter of Morocco, where a lot of different, art, architecture, and design kind of stems from. And so, yeah, one of the fun things that I had found when researching the Marinids is that this is where a lot of the Zelige tile patterns, the mosaic patterns, had originated from. So, that classic Moroccan kind of design that you see a lot in riyads or older buildings, this actually originated from this time period in this dynasty, which was something that, interested me a lot. So that was a cool little tidbit.
That's really cool. Ben, do you mind if I take it? I mean, just reading through this introduction, the first thing that really hit me is just how large the area was that they seem to have hegemony over Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco up into southern Spain. And not only is that a lot of land, it's a lot of very, very diverse cultures. So I'm really curious about, is there a particular area where you would say the Marinid dynasty, maybe this is a question that didn't come up in your research, but is in the current day kind of the best representation of the modern influence of the Marinid dynasty?
I think definitely the city of Fez as their like culture epicenter remains the kind of quintessential Marinid dynasty, and that's where you can see kind of the living effects of that, and also around like the Meknès region, just around Fez. Definitely, there throughout the Marinid dynasty, there were a few different conquests because they were very military forward. They were like gaining land, losing land. They had different fights up into Spain and over into Tunisia and everything. And so, even while a lot of these like kind of branches of the empire had changed and been like conquered and like changed throughout the years, Fez remained under the Marinid dynasty and definitely kind of showcased what their values were when it came to architecture and design, as well as university and religious schooling. So I think definitely Fez is the kind of quintessential Marinid, like lasting effect over there.
That's so interesting. So it sounds like a lot was happening around the area and was changing, and then Fez really was, like you said, the epicenter. Because I know, in other civilizations, so sometimes there's multiple places, or they're all kind of shifting with the time instead of kind of all being centered around one area. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I love Fez. I've been to Fez many times. Like my very first international trip to begin my Middle East fascination was in Fez and Meknes. So thank you, Marinids, for making such a wonderfully lasting city. But yeah, what I just found so fascinating, not only just how incredibly huge Fez is, and one of the largest outdoor marketplaces in the world, or souk, if you know what that term means. But on top of that, the reestablishment of Qarawiyyin University, all of the geometric tile work, the madrasas. I mean, there's just such a like preponderance of modern Morocco as I know it, really sort of stemming from what the Marinids focused on. I guess since you're currently living there and have been traveling and work across all of Morocco, maybe you don't see like the Marinids did this and I'm here, probably not, but the like cultural influence is very strong. I'm curious if there's like other pieces outside of Fez that you have noticed in your time in Morocco.
Mm-hmm. So something that's definitely ironic about me writing about the Marinid Dynasty is the one, imperial city that I haven't been to yet in Morocco because of a lot of the restrictions has been Fez, and I've been trying to get there for nearly a year now. But ironically, I've never been to Fez. Though, as you said before, like a lot of the different like tile work and design that we kind of like associate with not only just Fez, but all of Morocco stemmed from the Marinid Dynasty. And so I've definitely seen a lot of this work in a lot of old riyads and the guest houses officially in other imperial cities like Marrakesh. And as well as, later during the Marinid Dynasty, they came and conquered Marrakesh and definitely influenced there with the design and kind of how they built different mosques and things like that. And so you could definitely see those different influences happening over in like imperial cities such as Marrakesh too.
I have a quick question for you, Emma. Just for myself and anyone who's listening who's not familiar with the term Riyadh.
Oh, definitely. So riyads kind of have a funny like origin story here in Morocco. So traditionally in Morocco, a lot of people, if you lived in the Medina or the old city, you and your entire extended family would live in kind of these big, almost courtyard houses. So basically they're like a box, like a big square with like outdoor walls. And as you enter inside, there are different levels, usually like 2 or 3 levels, surrounding either a courtyard or some sort of like open air space in the middle. So they're all faced kind of inwards. And so like entire families, like children, aunts, uncles, grandparents, they would all kind of live together in like these communal spaces and have like a central, meeting area in the middle. And as kind of Morocco has like changed over the past even like 60, 50 years, a lot of these guest houses, as people began moving into cities and living, say, in apartments or living in smaller accommodations, a lot of these riyads or the traditional houses have been kind of renovated into more guest houses. So when you go to say like stay in Fez, or if you stay in Marrakesh or one of these old like ancient imperial cities, a lot of times like visitors to Morocco will want to stay in some of these guest houses to kind of feel what, traditional Moroccan life is like, or kind of traditional Moroccan architecture is as kind of a whole, which is a lot of them are very intricate design with their mosaics and have beautiful accents. And so that's definitely a big draw for guests coming to visit either, Marrakesh, Fez, Tangier, or even like some in Casablanca.
Wow. I've wanted to go to Morocco for quite some time and I haven't been able to, but that is really cool. Now I really, really want to go. So it sounds like this type of structure, the Riyadh, was kind of the predominant structure during the Marinid Dynasty.
Well, during my research, I hadn't actually came across any like definitive answer if like this was the predominant way of during the Marinid Dynasty specifically, though definitely in traditional kind of Moroccan like urban life, the riyads were kind of like a main facet of specifically Moroccan home life.
I can pretty definitely say on top of the riyads and the zalij or the design tile, beauty that is North African is known for, is really where the mosaic part of Al Fusait comes from. My very first trip abroad in the Middle East learning Arabic and the dimensions of, Middle East, North African culture was in Fez, Morocco, Meknès, this region that you're talking about, where tile work was everywhere in the best of ways, and so I have always had this fascination of the beauty that design, architecture, geometry. Well, I guess both. And really the mosaic or zalij, like this pattern work, I didn't really realize completely stemmed from the Marinids, and so I'm very much fangirling to learn that more so now. Thank you, Emma, for furthering my awareness. But I mean, absolutely the Ayak, well, I guess Al Husayfusa is also the same thing. All of that really began, for me at least, in Fez. And so to see and hear and read that the Marinids began that journey is partially why Al Husayk is even a thing today. So thank you, Marinids, for another modern influence. I'll update the section. No. But no, I think that's incredible to see the like wide impacts, not just in the riyads and the zalij and the architecture, but also just in like the cultural nuances of Morocco. I mean, you work for a tourism company, so you're selling the beauty, the dimensions, the aspects of Morocco, and a lot of it from just knowing about Morocco, but also reading what you wrote about the Marinids has that sort of connection point of this tile work and reverence for learning and a guest home to invite strangers and friends and family in is very ever present throughout Morocco. So it's really cool to see sort of where those pieces are traced back from. I'm curious if there's even more pieces of Moroccan culture or history that you can sort of trace to the Marinids.
No, definitely. And how you were talking about kind of the Moroccan hospitality, which is definitely what a lot of Moroccans are known for. These riyads function as like a huge part of just how people interacted with their neighbors, with strangers. And a lot of times people say, oh, the riyad doors are always open to kind of welcome in guests, even if it's from other family members or if it's just even strangers on the street. That's definitely a big part of Moroccan culture, is inviting people in, getting them a glass of Moroccan tea, like mint tea, and then chatting for hours, inviting them to dinner. And a lot of time that took place in these riyads, and obviously with these amazing deluge patterns typically. So
it sounds like the Marinids were also really known for a lot of their, you described it as a golden age in Fez. What did that mean in terms of like the culture and the education?
So from what I understood when researching the Marinid Dynasty is that the Golden Age definitely referred to kind of religious schooling and religious teaching. So as I mentioned before, a lot of madrasas or like religious schools were built during this time, and the Maliki Sunnism was instituted as the official religion of the Marinid Dynasty. So people were going to these schools and learning through like religious teachings, and obviously studying these things in depth, and studying like different crafts, and also just things like that.
Incredible. You're bringing back such incredible, nostalgic, wonderful memories of my times in Morocco. I mean, I know you wrote this article several months ago and are coming back to learning about this ancient empire sort of in juxtaposition to all the cool stuff you're doing in modern day, 2021 Morocco. But wow, it's just so wonderful to hear the influences, 800 years prior of what this empire really has done. I know there was a bit of a connection with Spain, right? In terms of its geography. And I was curious if you know anything more about southern Spain's Marinid connection, or just, the continual history of southern Spain being connected to northern African tribes.
So definitely the Manarids were, again, like a military expansionist state. And so they had pushed forward north into Spain and conquered part of the Andalus region. If you've ever been to the northern part of Morocco, even up into Fez, but up further into Tangier and on the Mediterranean directly, you'll notice that a lot of Moroccan culture is very, very influenced and shared with Spanish. So with most of southern Morocco or most of central southern Morocco, the second language is French. But if you move to the north, you'll hear Spanish much more often. And so definitely the south of Spain in the north of Morocco. They're only separated by like a few kilometers. So a lot of different, like, just even in the language, even in the culture, a lot of things are shared between them too.
I've heard a lot from friends who've studied abroad in Morocco that the influence of French combining with different Arabic dialects is really, really strong. So I'm really interested to hear, have you run into kind of an overlap between Arabic and Spanish in your time in Morocco?
Definitely. So I actually, before coming to Morocco, I previously studied French, and I had studied modern standard Arabic, so Fusha Arabic. And coming to Morocco, I was like thinking, oh yeah, at least I could kind of get used to. So here in Morocco, we have the dialect called like Moroccan Darija, which is definitely its own mix of both like Arabic, Berber, and French influences when you're in central Morocco. And so if you talk to any Moroccan, you'll say that each different city, each different region has its own different Darija dialect, and so it'll have its own different kind of influences. So here in Casablanca, where I live, it is very like French influenced, and we have kind of like the the quintessential Moroccan, if you will, like accent. Though if you move to the north, here I could kind of get by on like some Darija, some French. When I went to the north for the first time into Tangier, I'd begun, trying to speak in like the mix of like French and Darija, and nobody could understand me. I had taxi drivers trying to speak to me completely in Spanish. I had a bunch of people coming up to me thinking I was Spanish, thinking because they have a lot of tourists and guests from Spain. And so there was definitely a lot of confusion in the beginning, but you can kind of just like hear it if you're accustomed to the language, just even the different like, intonations and in the actual speech, which is really, really cool to kind of see how the language developed, though, because the north was eventually colonized by the Spanish and the central into French, and then unified later. Like just kind of the rainbow of different Moroccan Darija sounds and different dialects, which has been a very, very interesting, albeit kind of confusing thing to navigate here.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, I love Morocco for everything but the language components, because as an Arabic learner, it is so confusing to be in 7 different languages all around you all the time, or Arabic French, Arabic Spanish, French Spanish, Amazigh, and all over the place. But all the other components, as you wrote about in the Marinids, is what makes Morocco so special. I mean, their language too is very special. I love Morocco, do not get me wrong. I have a flag right here. It's, the mosaic part began in my time in Fez, but Darija is quite tough for an Arabic learner. So good on you for sticking it out and using it. That's impressive. I want to jump back to the Marinid just a little bit. I mean, I love talking about Morocco again all day long, but just to sort of rein it in just a little bit, I'm curious on sort of their like ruling system. I know several empires after the Marinids is now the same current king structure of Morocco, but I was curious if that's relatively similar to what the Marinids, how they were governed, and everything else in between.
Yeah. So as I had written in the post, the Marinids was run as an Islamic caliphate, and so religion was at its core one of the main pinnacle, the main centers of the actual dynasty. And then in terms of how they kind of like ruled their people and the kind of area that they had conquered, they mostly ruled over pastoral nomadic communities and collected taxes from small farmers and pastoralists. And as the empire grew and they expanded, they relied heavily on a lot of military conquest and gaining more land. And because they had controlled a very central part of the Mediterranean up into the Strait of Gibraltar, they had been able to collect, actually gain more control over, trade routes and things like that, and had eventually brought in, a lot more wealth and power and different people to kind of like continue these conquests throughout the region.
I mean, kind of continuing on the point of like the socio-political structure, how did that play out over kind of the lifespan of the Marinid Dynasty?
Definitely, from what I had researched, definitely the kind of strength of the Marinid Empire happened at the late 13th or the late 1300s into the 1400s. And as it kind of expanded and created these military strongholds, they had, a very like strong central government located in Fez. And though after time they were weakened not only by I think it was famine, but by the plague, the bad bout of the plague, and just more aggressive enemy dynasties kind of attacking them and like kind of, taking away a lot of their strongholds, that a lot of their central power had begun to decay because of these things.
It sounds like, sorry, Ben, I'm just really curious about this, the socio-political history aspect of it.
Me too. Take it away. Go for it.
This is such a fascinating structure, and I'm curious, not only how did it affect the structure today in Morocco, but, focusing in on the Marinids, Ben, I promise. You mentioned some political fragmentation within the Marinid Dynasty itself. What did that look like?
So within the Marinid Dynasty itself, so the Marinid Dynasty, run as an Islamic caliphate, was it was kind of run by sultans who were then consulted by Islamic visors. So different, advisors that would go and see the sultan. And I know that towards the end of the stronghold of the Marinid Dynasty, those visors had eventually kind of like crossed their sultan and wanted to gain more power through there. So there was, while there was external pressure on the dynasty through a lot of these different kind of enemies attacking and kind of threatening their rule, there was also internal political infighting within the Islamic visors going after the sultan's power.
Crazy, fascinating, love it. No, I could talk for days about the ancient political dynamics of all of these empires. I find it one of the most interesting parts as a forever poli-sci nerd to see sort of how these systems were set up, because they 100% influence and parallel our modern governments globally, Middle East or otherwise. So cool, fascinating. I also, sort of in that same vein, want to talk a bit about the econ. I'm assuming they are massive traders, given their incredible access to sea routes and the Mediterranean and North Africa and West Central Africa. So they're quite well situated. I was curious if there was, a certain product that they preferred or traded, or just, if it was just the pretty generic, I don't think the Silk Road made it all the way over there, but the African version of that throughout Northern and Central Africa.
Yeah, so definitely, even today, Morocco is kind of noticed as the gateway to Africa. It's this like very, very close geographical point with Europe, and also they do share a lot of, cultural and, political similarities. So being in this very strategic area, not only located on the Atlantic, but also on the Mediterranean, as well as in the Strait of Gibraltar, the Manarids had traded a lot of gold, ivory, and even enslaved people throughout Europe, the Middle East, and West Africa. And so they were kind of in this like very strategic stronghold where they could kind of control a lot was what was going on in the maritime trade, as well as through the land trade. And so that's generally generally where they had gotten a lot of their wealth and also political power within the region.
Makes sense. Yeah, cool. Love it. I mean, that's relatively typical for a lot of these empires, is a lot of trading of a lot of different goods. So cool. I just thought if there was a special thing, I thought I would ask, but wonderful. Thanks. Coretta, go for it. I know you had a question.
Sorry, yeah, I think my internet jumped for a second. No, but I just wanted to note, because you mentioned in the economics section that you wrote about that, the Marinids did base part of their economic system on trading enslaved people and forcing them as well into military service. So I think it's just important to, since you mention it, to also mention that in our conversation right now, that was an aspect of how they exploited people to build expand their power and expand their economic system, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It was, a key point in how they could kind of keep a lot of this political and military power at that time. And something that I had noticed as very interesting, or kind of, I wouldn't have guessed this when reading about a North African dynasty, is that a lot of the people that they had enslaved originated not only just from West Africa, close neighbor in the shared continent of Africa, but also from the Caucasus regions. So I had trying to research exactly how that they had, I came across the people from the Caucasus regions to forcibly be joined into the military, but I couldn't honestly find a reason as to why these people were there. So that's kind of a question that I had still lingering from here, how this kind of aspect had come about, and how this had kind of influenced the ruling of their dynasty.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Man, we can go on for days. There are so many really cool pieces here. I think we're gonna wrap up with this final question. Thank you, Emma, so much for this incredible knowledge base, and Greta, I love your insights and I appreciate your questions. To sort of wrap up, Emma, any final cool tidbits or interesting information that you want to share about your research on the Marinid Empire?
So definitely, I think one of the most interesting tidbits, at least for me, would be how the Marinids had influenced the proliferation of the Al-Qarawiyyan University. We'd all kind of struggled with that pronunciation before the call, but the Al-Qarawiyyan is considered one, if not the oldest university, even older than Oxford University, located in Fez. And just understanding kind of like how an institution, that to this day is still, teaching and still very like lively and still considered one of the best universities in the region, how that had come about because of a lot of the Marinids, emphasis on education, emphasis on design, and emphasis on kind of like cultivating these religious schools that, we still can kind of see the effects of. So that was something that I had, personally thought was just really, really interesting to see. And then also just, kind of understanding it within, the larger context of how, politics in North Africa had kind of played out. So this was just a great exercise to kind of like understand where I am geopolitically here in Morocco, and how a lot of these, facets of life had come from like, centuries ago. So definitely.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much for writing about the Marinids, for all the cultural insights of you currently living there. I think it's a wonderful addition to this conversation to learn about how modern Morocco, and the Morocco you are currently living through, is impacted by the incredible Marinid Dynasty. Thank you again, Greta, for co-moderating with me. It's always a joy. And thank you to our listeners for engaging with this wonderful content. To read even more, because we didn't get to all of the great pieces of the Marinids, go to our website, alfusaic.net. That's ALFUSAIC.net. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your evening.